Pour écouter cette session en français, veuillez cliquer en bas de votre écran sur l'onglet Interprétation et sélectionner le drapeau français.
Hello, bonjour.
Habari za leo.
On behalf of ICLEI Africa, the Africa Center for Cities, Our Future Cities,
Surge Africa and the Red Cross Crescent Climate Center,
We are delighted to welcome you to the Rise Africa 2023 Action Festival.
Rise Africa is a platform that brings together thinkers, doers, and enablers
to inspire action for sustainable cities.
This is the third edition of our virtual festival.
It brings together insights, practices, and visions from across the continent.
This year's theme is The Cities We Want.
the cities we want.
the cities we want.
The cities we want.
This mirrors the African Union 2063 Agenda vision, the Africa we want.
It is a wonderful Pan-African call for transformative change.
However, the agenda does not adequately embrace urbanization as a potential positive force for improving prosperity, inclusivity, and environmental well-being on the continent.
We need more emphasis on the role of cities and local action. And this festival aims to provide inputs into this agenda.
The cities we have are
Expanding,
incomplete,
inventive,
contested,
facing impending crisis, yet brimming with potential.
The cities we want are
people-centered,
Safe and healthy,
beacons of culture,
unflinchingly modern.
and adapting to change and leading global innovation.
We'll make these cities through
Experimenting,
learning
collaborating,
and amplifying the everyday actions of people who are shaping their cities.
The festival invites you to embrace different ways of knowing,
It invites you to forge new partnerships,
Experiment with new concepts and ideas.
to seek ways to bridge science, business, policy, and the arts.
Together, let's enter this space in the spirit of poetic possibilities.
The cities I want, I already have. In people, all of us children, mommy's sons and daddy's daughters, not raised ideally, but we're still proper. Carrying dust of townships on our skins, unwashable identities and unsolvable complexes, crisscrossing each other with dance, loving where hatred has tried, succeeding where governments have failed. I see monuments in these lives standing here, deities to be worshipped after now, each one gods in their own rights, kings and queens of the yellow and black. We live here together, synchronized dreamers in a city that never sleeps. If there is still one person left grinding on the streets, when you write about a place like Lagos, we do not convolute the language. Come meet us where joy has found us, on the streets where art has found voice, in dance theaters raised on canals, and open mics staged on wooden bridges. I found my cities here, in the people, full of life, each one a road rager, each one a mouthful of curses, each one a mouthful of blessings, each one a hand full of blessings, because that's how it ought to be.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining today's session. We are so excited to have you here. Just before we get started, I just want to let you know that Zoom, we're having some challenges with Zoom right now. So when you join, it may have renamed you automatically to my name, alias Gurjan Mohammed. So please feel free to rename yourself so that we can know who is in the room, and we can have this fun conversation going with you, with the team that we have here as the panel. And really excited to host you today. Before I go too much into details, introducing our organization, I'll just like to introduce our team and myself as well. Let me start with my colleague, Matt, who's going to be one of our speakers today. Matt, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Eli. Hi, everybody. I'm Matthew Oddendorf. I'm the data science lead at Open Cities Lab.
Awesome. Lerato?
Hi everyone, I am Lerato Musehle and I'm a designer at Open Cities Lab.
Thanks, Lerato. My name is Eliasgar. I'm a project lead at Open Cities Lab. I work with cities, I work with NPOs, and really excited about hosting all of you. Like I said previously, we are from Open Cities Lab. And for those of you who don't know us, we are a civic tech organization, and we basically develop technology to improve and aid evidence-based planning. We work across 3 pillars. We're firstly built on the idea of empowering residents so that they have the information to improve their spaces. The second is we want to help cities build capacity that meets the residents' needs and improve service delivery. And our third pillar is we want to build trust and accountability in the civic tech space and help tech to be used for transparency and better governance. We don't do this on our own. We work with really key partners who help us and make a massive difference to our work, and a core team that has also joined this chat and this session today that are driven by the same motto of helping people. So we are very excited to have you join us today. Please feel free to introduce yourself on the chat. Maybe introduce yourself by your name, where you're from, where you're joining us from, rather, and if you are from a particular organization or there is a particular reason you're here, and we'd love to know who is in the room. Furthermore, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to put them on the chat. I will be basically discussing and chatting with Matt and Laura the whole time. I'll be asking them some questions. They'll be asking me some questions, perhaps. I'll be the main moderator, but this is very fluid. And while we're speaking, there might be something that you relate to, something that you know of. Please feel free to put that on the chat. You might have a question as well. So please feel free to also put that on the chat as well. We really want to hear from you and answer some of your questions and comments. Let me see. Yes, one thing that I had to mention was if you do want a translation, if you're French speaking primarily, if you want translation to what we are speaking about, you can click on the tab at the bottom that says interpretation, and you'll get the interpretation in the language that you're seeking. And then lastly, before we go into the session, we have a few icebreakers. And basically 3 questions for us just to know you a bit better. And I've launched it right now. Matt, can you confirm if you can see the polls?
I can see it. Yes, Ellie.
Cool. So our first question is there, because today we are talking about data, we are talking about cities, we want to know, is there any data sitting somewhere in your organization that you think would be useful to analyze or automate by linking it to a dashboard? Our second question is, are you doing anything about automating this and helping your organization? And lastly, do you like donuts? And if you do like donuts, please let us know in the chat which donuts you like. We're very interested about the donuts, especially. Matt, do you like donuts?
I do, but my sons eat them before one can get to me.
That's unfortunate.
I love them from afar.
Lerato, yourself, do you like donuts?
Yeah, I like glazed donuts. No extra toppings, just simple glazed donuts.
Those are the best. Those are absolutely the best. My wife loves donuts, so inadvertently, I also love donuts. I'm not supposed to say I don't love donuts because she loves them. So yeah, it looks like a lot of people in our session as well love them. 67% say they love them, and 33% say they are okay. I am going to give us, we have some comments as well. Glazed for the win by Monique. Lovely. So the chat also agrees with you, Lerato. We are fans of glazed. Cool. For those of you who have said that you have not started yet, or you have started, maybe you don't know how to start, I think this session is the perfect session to start, and it may help you get started with your engagements with your organization and starting to use data more effectively. Sorry, let me get myself oriented. Matt, can you see my screen?
I can. We're on case study intro.
Perfect. And Lerato, can you see my screen as well?
Yes, I can see your screen.
Cool. I'll end the poll now, but please feel free to put your comments about these 3 questions there. I'm also going to share the results with you now. Just the first one is that 57% says that yes, there is somewhere in the organization that there is some data they're sitting with, which they would like to automate. 43% are not sure. Mostly people have said no, they aren't doing anything about automating it right now, or the majority of them have said they haven't started. And then the last is our donuts question, and 57% say they love them. Second one say they're okay. If there are any desserts that you find interesting, please feel free to put them on the chat as well. Would love to hear them. Cool. Let me get us started with our topic today. A quick introduction to our topic today is that we are going to be talking about cities and data in a nutshell. We know that data is everywhere today, and you will see that every organization wants to collect data, process data, and view data in a way that can help them make decisions better. And cities are very similar to these entities, these organizations. Our cities are made up of millions of residents who have individual needs. And city officials and the partners that we work with are always trying to look at how do we support our residents better? How do we serve them better? How can we plan for today and plan for the future and build resilient spaces for the people that occupy them? And we think that data can help partly with this. We think that data can help with making decisions more effective and can help cities allocate their resources more effectively as well. Today, we will start this conversation. It's a very large topic, and I think we'll barely touch the surface of it. But I don't think that this is the end of the conversation. I think this is the start of the conversation, rather. We really want to engage on this more. And if you want to chat with us more, please feel free to reach out to us. And just to tell you that we will also not discuss about some important considerations such as gender equity and social inclusion, which are very important, but because we're limited with time, we won't be able to touch on this aspect. But what we will touch on are 4 very important aspects that go into developing a problem, identifying the solution, and some of the perspectives that go into identifying that solution. We wanted to make this very interactive, so we developed a story. It's just a story where we showcase some of these aspects that go into our engagements with cities, its employees, and how do we take into consideration the perspective of residents. And an important point here is that whatever we do, we don't do it on our own. We work with individuals in these cities that help us co-develop solutions and help us understand their needs so that we can help them better. One more consideration here is that while we are discussing this, it might think that this is a very sequential process, that you might think, okay, this is step 1, this is step 2, this is step 3, but that's not the case entirely. What happens generally, this is a very agile process where we go back and forth with many aspects. We start a conversation with design, for example, then go to data, and so on and so forth. And that way we develop the solution together. Cool. Let me start by introducing our case study. Our case study is very vague, and Matt and Laura, please come in if you feel like adding any more details here. But our case study is very vague. It starts with a very, very simple request, and we'll show you how we navigate this request. We'll also discuss some key recommendations and how do we balance delivery and product needs while navigating this space, which is full of confusion and complexity for everyone that's actually involved in this. So what happens at the start of our conversation? So a city team has reached out to our OCL director to help them with developing a service delivery dashboard that's linked to a particular data. What they've done is they've sent us data on this email, and they want us to get started with the dashboard as soon as possible. We've been told to complete it in 1 month if possible. I see a smile on Matt's face right now, and we're going to discuss this a bit more right now. But we have been told in 1 month we have to complete this. There are 3 main points here. One is that they've given us data. Second is they want a dashboard. They've told us, okay, we want a dashboard. And the third one is they want it as soon as possible, in 1 month. Yeah. OCL director has written to me. I'm the project lead for this. He has told me that, okay, we have this request. Can you please reach out to the partner? And what I've done is I know that the design team always tells me that, hey, when you want to start, this is Lerato and my other colleague, Paul, who always tell me when you want to start, you have to have a design session to kick this off. And you have to unpack the problems. So I've written to the partner to ask them when can they meet for this design session. And let me come to Lerato now. So Lerato, why do we need this session? I mean, isn't it pretty clear? The partner said, I want a dashboard. Isn't that the solution?
Well, the reason why we actually need the session in the first place is to identify which data sets we can begin to work around and what the core purpose of outputting the data is to decide the best method to display it. And to also understand from decision makers, data handlers, and analysts, how we can simplify sharing knowledge. And also the whole point of having a user needs engagement is to be able to empathize with the users because we aren't actually designing for ourselves, we're designing for people. So we need to properly understand what their problems are and who are the users. Is there any gatekeeping in the process to be able to provide a wholesome solution for the departments?
That's very interesting, Lerato. I like what you've talked about, who are the users. I'm very interested in this. Is it possible perhaps, so we have been told by the partner that they want dashboard. Is it possible that the dashboard is not the solution, by the way?
Yeah, it's possible that the dashboard is not the solution, or the dashboard is part of many other solutions, depending on the findings that we get during the user needs assessments.
Cool. So what findings in the user needs assessment will help us define this, and that what is the actual solution to the problem?
I think it's just understanding who the primary user is and understanding the different touch points. If there is data sharing needed in the departments, what kind of data do they have? And then with all of those, just deciding which solution to go for. It might be a dashboard, but what information actually goes onto the dashboard and what do the users actually need to see on there?
Yeah, so I agree. And I think that's going back to your first point there is who are the users? So here we have someone who wrote to us, right? They sent us a message. I mean, if that's the case, isn't the person who sent the email the user? Are there more than one users, and who are we creating the solution for?
The person who might have sent the request might be the decision maker or like a secondary user, and not actually the person, the primary user who's actually involved in the current system.
Can we define who the primary user is? How do we know if someone is a primary user?
Okay, so the primary user is involved in specific touch points of the process. Another way to define the primary user is the person who, let's say, for instance, the data analyst could be the primary user as well. And then the secondary user could be the person who makes decisions in the whole department or ecosystem.
Yeah, that's a very good point about this primary user could be the data analyst that uses the tool every day. I want to bring in Matt here. Matt, we have worked with tools quite a bit here. Who do you think we have this person and they've sent us an email? Narrator said that the primary user is a data analyst. It can be a different person. We want to separate them from the secondary user and the decision maker. How do we define this from all the work that we have done with cities?
Yeah, thanks, Hurley. I mean, it's an interesting question. I mean, you can have different tiers of primary user, I'd imagine, where you have the person whose job it is to present the data, as the router has mentioned. There's the decision maker who consumes the data. But additional secondary users might be the line departments that have to act on decisions made from the dashboard. Or it's if information, let's imagine we're working with an example with service delivery. If there's information coming through on the total amounts of service delivery or tickets that have been opened, there could be departments that will be contacted as a consequence. And we must also never forget that a key user in a lot of this is ultimately the person living in the city who's lodged the request. And so I think there's quite an interesting tier. The primary users can be varied, as Dorota says, but I think it's also always important in the civic technology space. I mean, dashboards we can look at and say, cool, like they're useful tools in many sectors, but in the civic technology, we also always like to try and keep the eye that ultimately this needs to improve the circumstance of the person who reported the information sometimes. And so, yeah, I think that's also another aspect. I think you can have a varied breakdown of users.
Yeah, thanks, Larta and Matt. Those are very important points, I think. And I always find this journey so interesting that when we go into these sessions where we engage with partners and define who is actually going to use the tool, who's going to help us make key decisions. And I think we are going to also discuss this a bit later about who are our champions and who do we define as our champions, because there can be different levels there. And that can change the solution itself as well. And I think that leads to my next question, right? Lerato, I think that when you look at the user, I think depending on the user, sometimes the solution can change as well, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Well, during the user journey, not user journey, but user engagement, just finding out which users are involved in the department and what the department actually does. So I think first and foremost, that's what you need to find out. And depending on the challenges that they face or gaps in their current process, that could possibly change the outcome of the solution.
Yeah, that's that I think I lean on to my previous experience sometimes, that you go into these sessions and you think that it's going to be one session. I think you put it very well, that you might find out that the different challenges that we need to engage a different set of users as well. And I think your diagram places it very well. Can you speak to that a bit more? Because I see arrows going frontwards and then going backwards. Why do we have this? Why don't we just go sequentially, you know?
Okay, so this diagram is the design thinking process. So we use design thinking in conjunction with code design principles as a method to involve partners and users at every stage of the design process. So when you see these lines going backwards and forwards, this is an iterative and non-linear process that we use to understand users, challenge assumptions, redefine problems, and create solutions to prototype and test. So this is what the design team uses to solve the problems, and it's not just one linear process. You go back. If you need to go back after testing to empathize with the users, you go back. If you need to redefine the problem, you go back after testing, because ultimately, like I said, we are not designing for ourselves. So the prototype that we create needs to be also tested by the users, and then we need to go back and look at their needs and see if the prototype aligns with the user's needs.
Yeah, and that journey, right? You walk with them, right? Because it's not like someone tells you, hey, this is a problem I have, go and solve it on your own, come back after 5 months and tell me here's the solution and that's the solution. We are almost like, no, let's walk together, because we know that at the beginning we might not understand your problem completely, but as time goes, you will help us understand it more by testing our tools, right? So Matt, I want to bring you in here as well. We talked about that solution change. We talked about that depending on the user, the solution might be different, but the data may also be different, right? That one set of data might not be able to speak to all users. Can you speak a bit more about that?
Sure. So I think in general, you're going to be looking at collecting the subsets of information that speak to each particular user. In general, I would try and always try to ensure that one user, one focused set of data for one specific need per dashboard. Trying to do sharing real estate on a single dashboard would be quite risky in my opinion. And I'd rather soon we move to a secondary dashboard for a different user, because that can have a bespoke user design thinking journey. I think what's important is to understand data across the users and who needs, where are their connections between different users and the same data. Because if two different users are viewing data from different perspectives, are we making sure that it's being reported in a way that is meaningfully comparable? So being able to make sure that you can speak to, in different use cases, still able to use the same data and clearly help the user transition into what they're thinking about. I thought just something else interesting in terms of users in the city context, you've also got the users that are going to embed something like this dashboard into the city systems. So your downstream users are going to be people like your IT departments or your technical support. So they're also, in a way, part of the design thinking in terms of what technologies they are using, what structures internally will make it easier for them to bring something into the city. It could also be what are the outputs of something, like making a dashboard print to a PDF. Are there some users that will only consume that PDF report? And so you've now got a static representation of the data. And so I think there's also those other levels. But I think in terms of data, yes, you generally want to try and have a data structure that allows you to have a common evidence base that can speak to multiple purposes, but that can seamlessly shift between those purposes without requiring massive recalculation or reframing. So a lot of planning has to go into what is that initial or central data set that will be used to speak to these users to ensure that it can service as many as possible.
Thanks, Matt. And I think we're going to unpack this in a bit, and those are very key important points I think here that you've spoken about. One about sustainability here as well is that the other consideration here is that what are cities used to in terms of the tools that they use. So if they are used to using Google a platform, they're used to that. If we develop something on Microsoft, they might not feel comfortable and have a challenge with that. I think it also speaks to what you have spoken about there. Lerato is meeting the user where they are at. Yeah. I want to come to you, Lerato, and ask you two more questions really. First one is, how do we create this user journey, right? How do we know how they'll move through doing the process with us, and how do we unpack their current systems? So they already use something, that system most probably doesn't work for them. How do we understand that system and those key challenges? Is that part of the design thinking process as well?
Yeah, so that's in the define space, so the third block on the design thinking process. So we ask, when asking about the current system, we ask questions like how the data sets are currently shown and outputted, what current challenges the city, what current challenges prevent the city from effectively using data to improve their overall service delivery. Also identifying gaps in the system. Another thing is to ask while doing the user journey is, are there blocks involved in getting access to the data? Unintentional gatekeeping, for instance, a specific user is required to share data that is constantly needed. Maybe the data is also locked in complex systems, or the existing technology is not user-friendly. So that's what we do when asking about the current system. And then we also propose an ideal system. So what tech interventions can be applied to the journey, and also if we can also add governance interventions. So we have the current journey side by side with the proposed system to show how we can improve their overall journey.
That I think is fantastic. I think that just speaks to, I think it's also because we as human beings get used to the systems that we use. So every day we use these systems and they may have worked yesterday for us, but today suddenly we find that they don't work for us for this reason, right? We might think that we have been, I'll give an example about myself as actually as OCL. We have been using Google Docs for quite some time. And recently we found that, you know what, Google Docs are great, but we need something more useful that works across the organization. And now we are trying to use Notion. So that's also a very good process of realizing, okay, what worked for me yesterday is not necessarily what works for me today as well, right? Thanks, Larato. I wanted to ask you a final question before I move to Matt and the data process. This idea of iterative development, right? This idea of prototype development. Why do we do prototype development? Why do we come, like what we have done previously with our work is that, okay, we develop a system and then we go to the user and tell them, okay, this is the system we have developed. We want you to give us feedback. Why don't we just go like, okay, we'll continue developing this until all your needs are met? Why don't we do that?
So there's no such thing as perfection. So sometimes there are gaps that we miss, or like needs that we overlook. So just going back to the user and making sure that this prototype works for them and it meets their needs. Because I'll say this again, we are not designing for ourselves. So if it was just designing for us, we would have just gone ahead and done whatever we think is right, without involving the user in the prototype stage. And if we do that, that would be a mistake, because you would pilot a product that doesn't meet the user's needs and is now useful, and it's just useless, and it's just a product sitting there that no one uses. It doesn't meet anyone's needs. But if you go back to the users and continuously ask them, does this meet your needs? Can you even use the prototype that we have proposed to you? I think, I think that's a good way of trying to find the best solution for our users and not ourselves.
So many clicks there. So I think that point about I think when you start this process, right, there's confusion. There's confusion because I think that the user thinks they know they want something, but as they go through the process of these questions back and forth, they realize actually their needs might be different. And as you prod them and you engage them, this is what happens. I think this has happened to me. I think recently there was a case where we were needed to develop a dashboard, when in reality what was needed was a collection system, a data collection system. So the dashboard wasn't the solution was a data collection system. And that is all the time, that's what we are grappling with the whole time. I mean, we'll get to the dashboard eventually, but I think that it's important to build our systems as well. And I think that segues quite well into Matt's section. Before I get to you, Matt, 2 comments. Totally agree. Sometimes a simpler solution is actually more helpful. then developing more complicated tools. Lovely, love that comment. Simple is perfect, I think. Garth asks, how do you incorporate governance aspects into a predominantly quantitative dashboard? Garth, we're going to come to this. We have a section on governance and strategic thinking. So I'm going to park that a bit for later, but thanks very much. Please feel free to ask any questions in the chat, any comments that you have. We are really enjoying them. Cool, Matt, let's go to your section. And I am very interested about this. So again, I'm going to the main email. I'm going back to the email at the beginning. The email comes with the data. The partners send the data, we have the data. So I think it's as simple as saying we can build the dashboard now, right?
Sure. I mean, there's a wonderful point and term that was used there, the word just. Just is such an interesting word in the development of tech pipelines, particularly with cities. But I mean, I'll discuss that. I mean, I'm actually, I'd like to, I think it's a good time actually to answer Garth's question. So I think it's very well raised, and it's central to these aspects around data structuring. My opinion on governance is that governance level is critical and has to actually wrap the information, the users, the roles of those users already before the information hits that data source from which the dashboard is created, understanding what flows might come from that data into a dashboard. So knowing with each column of data, each indicator, each feature of your data sets that sit in cities, it's understanding to whom is that information significant, to whom is that information sensitive. And that comes from the development of solid data catalogs, data dictionaries that also take into account users and their specific roles and ambit of influence, so that when something goes to the dashboard, it's that those aspects are being considered before it is even used in the construction of the dashboard, because we should know that what's going to be shown to which user and what downstream impact it could have, along with quality metrics as to whether the data is complete, where could there be issues, when was it last updated, are there certain requirements that need to be, or policies that need to be attached to that data such that it will only be used if it has met certain criteria. So it's a very, very important point that you raise. And that is something that we, in this example, this is the start of the journey. But what we are ultimately looking at doing is trying to walk down that journey and begin educating the partner on the need for these governance aspects, or tapping into the governance that they already have. And so I'm going to, through the examples that I'm going to give here of certain data structurings within data interventions or projects within cities, I'll mention where governance usually sits to support that. So thanks, Ali. Yeah, so generally there are two types of data structures, where one is a third one is a hybrid of both. But there's usually, we either take, data is often taken a centralized approach, where we take information coming in, it's converted into a singular format in a specific central location, and it is then fed out to different applications or different users. So in my little example here, you could imagine data sets from several different departments flow through a thing called a data broker, which is what takes that information from the structures that it's stored in, because they could be very different systems depending on the department, and pulls it into a centralized database that then is connected up to your dashboarding or your external use. Now, an example for us in the specific city context is that information could come from that Excel file. It could live in a folder that has several data sets from different departments. That needing to go into a central database, that database could be an Excel sheet that has now got information. They've given us information that may come from multiple systems. And so it's wanting to unpack carefully understanding where did the information come from in the data set we've been given, and understanding the procedures that worked on it to get it to that form, before it goes out. Now, we might not do that journey right now. That might be something that we walk with them if they want to automate the process, or as in going back to Garth's comment in the question in the chat, is if we want to start attaching governance and aspects to that information, we would go to these more advanced representations. But an example, what I've got at the bottom there is just an example that we recently did with the city, is just having data in a folder. If you just mind going back one, Ellie.
Sure.
Data in a folder that goes through a system like Airflow, which is simply there to move information from one place to another, into an open source data portal like CCAN and connecting to Power BI. That can be a full end-to-end example of a centralized data system, because that information is being gathered through an abstraction layer into that central repository. The next system, if you don't mind changing the slide, thank you, is a distributed architecture, where we acknowledge that there are going to be different departments that have different levels of data maturity or data experience, will have different types of systems. And instead, and we want to avoid the risk of creating potential copies of information, driving towards the idea of do we move everything into one central location, or do we try and rather know where the information is contained in the city network? So something like a data catalog knows where the information comes from. And when we access it, we query it where it lives. So you're not taking information, copying it from one place to another, creating a new copy. You're saying, okay, how do I connect this directly to the source from whence it comes? But yeah, so that is another mechanism where you learn where the information is kept. And when you create a dashboard, it pulls the pieces together and feeds them into the dashboard. And this presents another opportunity for that governance question, wrapping the governance around the catalog, because that then becomes your kind of clearinghouse of information. And then one last slide there, I think. And then we can maybe use this just as keep this in the background as we continue our discussion here, just understanding where different stakeholders fit into this. Internal databases, external users that need to analyze, make decisions, provide feedback, report to external stakeholders, and then also feed that information back into the city and the departments, the source departments that create the information. So that was just kind of a brush through of the different types of structures we can approach. The one that we're working with right now, using a file via email to a dashboard, is very centralized, but that's okay. But in time, we may find that although the current example is centralized, we may realize that building this into the city or taking it to future steps could result in us needing to think of it as a very distributed system. So yeah, that's just as a high-level introduction. So from my perspective, is when I go into these sorts of things, is to understand what type of scenario we're working with.
Yeah, I think latching onto it, and I think there's a step right before these systems and all that, right? So I think let's go to this user needs session that I had with Lerato. And the partner said, I want to manage our resources very effectively. So I want to know the wards, the top 20 or 10 wards, which have the highest number of service delivery incidences, where we pay our closest attention to. These are our top priorities. How does the data team know that you can answer that question with that data? How will we know this?
Sure, that's a great question. I mean, we need to unpack, I think this also is part of that data journey, is saying, what are the questions the user has to answer? Always start with the question. I always try to resist the thing is the point where we've got this data set, can you make a dashboard? It's like, well, sure, but you can make a dashboard out of anything. What do you what questions do you want to answer? So if they then raise that to me, I know that I need to make sure that they are either keeping a record of which ward something is from, or at least an address. Some version of ability to link either through geolocation or through name of ward to that boundary. And so that's immediately that question, and the question and answer required triggers a quest to ensure that that information is there. Another thing is if we're interested in terms of they want to know what are the outstanding service delivery reports, I would then want to make sure that there's both a start date and an end date that is actually filled in in the system so that we can return a number and say, this is how many days this ticket has been opened, for example. So the process we always take is understanding, okay, what questions and answers do you have? This relates very much to the user. And then we see, is there information that answers this? And then if it's a case of, well, we don't have everything we need here to answer those questions, where could that information be? And then that's when you start to see, okay, we need to maybe consider another system as part of the chain. So maybe we need to get that geolocation information from the GIS department. We need to find a way to blend it to this information, maybe in the department that we're looking at. So I think it's always start with the question, start with the impact, start with those elements, and then we work back to the data.
And yes, exactly. That's. I think that question also links back to design there, Lerato, right? Is that the partner has given us all these questions that they want to answer. And the next step, I guess, is for us to go to data and tell them, okay, these are the questions, this is the data, can we answer them? What if the data team, Matt, comes to us and tells us, hey, we actually can't answer with this data? Can you speak to that a bit, Lerato? I think it speaks a bit to the iterative process. What do we do next? How do we go about engaging the partner? I think it's still there. We are back to the design process, right?
Yeah, I think we go back to the empathize process again, because we're moving from the define back to empathize process. So we will ask again, we'll ask the questions again about what their needs are. And should we not be able to like create this dashboard or use this data set? Is there another way or another route that we can go? And these questions can be answered by the users by going back to the empathize phase.
Lovely. Yeah. And this is why I think we say this is such an iterative process, because I think that what we realize quite a bit is that we may have data, but that data may not fit the purpose that the user wants to answer. And that doesn't mean that that's it. That doesn't mean that we cannot answer them. Perhaps there is data sitting somewhere else, but that's an entire journey where we are going to define who is it that has this data. And that fits into my next question to you, Matt. You've spoken about this a bit more, but I think I want to make it a bit clear. Who owns the data? Because is it the person who shared the data with us? Is that the person who owns the data? And you've also spoken about how do we get it continuously? I'm very interested in this. How do we make sure that we are building the system for the city? How do we make sure that this sustainably fits into a dashboard if a dashboard is the solution?
Sure. No, and those are all great questions. This is all part of that journey that we end up walking, ideally, with a partner. Because a dashboard at a point in time is static. It can still be valuable, but is this something that needs to continually update? Which is important because that then speaks to moving humans out of the process chain. And that then requires careful coding and infrastructure to make sure that it can be done without a human supervision. I think we forget sometimes how much a human sanity checks, tests, autocorrects information as we move it compared to what a machine does. And I think the best and worst thing about a computer is that it does what you tell it to. So if you haven't told it the right things to do, it's going to do the wrong things. So, I mean, understanding, that's also part of the needs assessment, if we can, is to understand, well, is this a once-off? Are you using this for a presentation? And that's just a proof of concept to show what could be done. Or is this something that the partner is seeing as becoming a core business process? And then it's about understanding, well, to whom are those business processes linked? That start speaking to governance. And that question of the ownership of the information is very, very important, because it's in the kind of modern speak around data governance in cities is who are the custodians? Who's the person who's ultimately responsible for the data steward or the data custodian of that piece of information, who ultimately who the buck stops with? when it comes to the use of that information. They are the ones who need to make sure that they are acknowledging that there's compliance with national legislation. Elements like papaya, they ultimately need to act in that, the role of the data officer or the custodian of that information. And so these are then journeys that we do need to walk, and we need to ask those questions. Who does own this information? But the interesting part, and it's also then important about when one forms partnerships with cities, is understanding what is the data sharing relationship that we will have with them. And what are our terms of work? What do we agree to? What are the sharing principles, data security? That all comes into play, and are nuances that are worth thinking on. Fortunately, there are wonderful people called lawyers that help with this. And my life dramatically improved when we found a wonderful data and IP lawyer. But it's a very important part of the whole process. And then, yeah, in terms of long-term, something that mitigates pieces of this is that if we're hoping to put this into the city system, we can hopefully seldom have to leave the structures of the city in terms of the information. But that then also requires the building of the relationship with individuals that are key to making these sorts of processes happen. So it's navigating, okay, the department has asked for something, but now how do we help them partner with their own internal structures that are there to support this? And maybe it's as simple as us saying, cool, I think you need to ask this, this, and this, bring this to the IT department. IT department is like, wonderful, we've actually got a system for that, let's connect you. But sometimes those journeys take a little while to walk. And so ultimately, we've also got to kind of see that sustainability, where does this thing end? And that helps direct our journey. So it's complex, it's really complex, because we're meeting the needs of the user, the consumers of the dashboard, but we're also needing to understand the key stakeholders that accept and move that information and embed in the city for sustainability and future-proofing, while ultimately making sure that it delivers for the resident of the city. And so it's a very complex question, and it comes from careful, stepwise relationship building and continual sanity checking. And this is also why you don't want to just go away and build something and take as long as it to make all the features, because each one of those could be loaded with a specific aspect that we need to tailor to the nuances of that city environment, particularly its unique needs, its unique structures, its unique governances, and its unique needs.
Yeah, so many great points there, Lerato, Matt, thanks very much. I just want to add to this point, and I want to speak about this from a personal experience, I think, is that when you attend these meetings with city partners and city colleagues, often there is someone who is presenting this data, right? And I think as human beings, we assume very easily that whoever is presenting the data is the one who owns the data. And I speak for this from my own experience, is that initially in one of the projects, we thought that there was one department that owned the data. But what we realized is that department was actually processing the data from somewhere else. So the raw data was sitting somewhere entirely else. And what we had to do is go to that other department, engage with them. And that can make a massive difference, because if you work with the secondary data, there's already processes going on in that data. They might be cleaning data manually. They might be doing something with the data that changes your output in a particular way. So those are very important considerations. And then the second thing here, I think, is about, is the solution actually being implemented by someone else? So it might be that we are duplicating efforts here. It might be that someone has asked us, can you create a dashboard linked to this data? But there is already another department somewhere else already doing that. And we don't want to waste resources. We want to help cities. And I think that's what I think is so useful in this space, is that we want to work with partners towards the solution. Even if someone else is implementing the solution, it doesn't matter. My last point here, Matt, before I move on to the next stage, is that I know that you love Metabase. Metabase, for those of you who don't know, is a dashboard system. So Matt, you love Metabase. Is it as simple as me saying, okay, we are going to create this dashboard on Metabase? You're muted, I think.
Yeah, I noticed. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, it isn't as simple as that, no. And it is, but I do love Metabase. The reason I like it is it's open source, which is always a nice thing. But also, what I like about it in the content. Now, there's a loaded question. I think you did it on purpose. But the
you know I did.
One of the biggest challenges in the city information space is user access and the ability to share. What I've always liked about Metabase is that if you organize your own system, you can control user access at multiple tiers. You can add more users, you can share it quite easily. Other systems, like enterprise level systems, don't make sharing isn't one of the front and center aspects of it. And so it becomes challenging, but those solutions are often much more feature rich. But again, when it comes down to the city, we've got to work with what they work with often. And so we can't just come in and say, look, we're going to work with the system, you've got to use it. We've got to, as you say, we want to make sure that it's who's our user, meet them where they're at. But we then have to be prepared for the challenges of something that might require licensing. Licensing costs may require procurement, understanding. We also need to understand how is the security system set up for sharing for these enterprise level systems. So I think what's useful is to be able to, if needs be, use a system that we can quickly show a concept, proof of concept, but then use that immediate to be able to completely scrap that and take from it engagement and excitement and move it into the systems that work within the city. And yeah, I think that's sharing is always one of the biggest challenges, and that also will come with a relationship with the city and understanding, well, what are your security protocols? How do we move things through the gateways and the firewalls that are all there to protect information? But yeah.
Lovely. Great comments there. I think that eventually also you build the system that the city really needs, and how you share it can be so important because they want it. They want the system that they've asked for, and we need to make sure that they are able to access it. Some comments on the chat. If you guys, Matt, Lerato, if you have any comments to these, please just feel free to interrupt.
I do. I really like, Danny, what you mentioned there. I mean, I think if there is that sectoral digitization committee and a clear policy, it's very, very important. It's really helpful. It's making sure that that does exist, or if it does, and if it does, connecting into it. I think they're always going to be interesting interdepartmental nuances. And it's then taking that, working with it and understanding what are those nuances, what is the flow. But absolutely, the goal is to have that sort of system core to cities that are having a data, and on top of it, having that data strategy of what does the city seek to do with its information, leverage it as its asset, and bring benefit to its residents. I always enjoy how in the city of New York's organogram, they have the city resident above the mayor, which is quite a cool, it's a small thing, but it speaks volumes. Yeah.
Yeah, lovely. I agree. The resident is the person that we are planning for, and that's, I think, city officials also know that. And it's such a good reminder. That's a great example, Matt. Colleagues, sorry, it might be that some of you are just named my name. We are getting some issues on Zoom. So if there are lots of comments from Alias Gurjamo, I know it's different. But if you want to rename yourself, please feel free to do that. You can do that by clicking on the 3 dots up there. There's one comment. This is such a good reminder of how much time and effort it takes to really understand a system and organization and a user. Without understanding, whatever one develops won't fully meet the needs. Perfect. Totally agree. And then the second comment is building trust also takes time. I think that's such a good comment, really. Anyone has, Lerato, Matt, do you have a comment on that? Do you want to speak more to that? I resonate with that a lot. I think sometimes I would start with one department, and then I'll make relations with another department. After a few months, I see that you have so many other, now you know exactly where each department fits in, and that trust has been built because now they know that you're here to help them. You're not here to tell them what you want to do. You're not here to bamboozle their work. You're here to walk with them. Any comments here, Lerato, Matt?
Well, I think once you have built trust with the departments that you're working with, you can then begin to identify the champions in that specific department who want to see the change happen and who would actively engage with you in every step of the design process to make sure that we design something that is useful to their department.
Yeah, and I think, Lerato, what that speaks to is that we won't generally only get the champion at the beginning when we do the user needs session. We might get them a few months later, and that's completely fine as well. That's completely acceptable. It's an iterative and agile process. Cool. Looking at time, I want to move on to the strategic considerations. And Matt, you've spoken about this. Lerato, you have also touched on this. I'm very interested in this. I think that my first consideration always is, where does this dashboard fit in terms of the city's strategic goals? We know that cities have IDPs. We know that they have certain goals that they're reaching towards. And I'm almost asking myself, okay, we are creating this dashboard, but Matt, you say that we also need to look at the long-term goal here, right?
Yeah, I think there's that interesting balance to walk, and it completely depends on the city and the teams that you're working with as well, because in some places people are very far along the journey, and it's more about what are the collaborative efforts we can come together. In some contexts, there might not necessarily be a strong strategic relationship around data, or that centralized and a truly effective central plan. As was mentioned in the chat. Now, for that, we don't ever want to be creating a parallel state. At least I try not to, with cities, in that, cool, we come into a department, we've got a good rapport, we're getting along well, we've built trust, it's exciting. We build a dashboard. Then they ask for another one and another one. And slowly what we're doing, if we're not careful, is we become a parallel state to the system that's supposed to be, that's built there. And it then needs to be, we must be careful not to create this parallel state to the system that's supposed to exist. Ultimately, we want to see cities be completely self-sustaining, be able to do this data sharing, not through the mechanisms of a third party, unless it's for very specific reasons. And so I think that strategic goal is to make sure that we're always seeing, how does this enter common strategy, a common data purpose that can be expanded through the city, through the channels and the people that are there to do it. We don't want to come and take over other people's space. We want to just be there to assist and help where needed, to maybe broker relationships or enable and support. As what it needs to, I mean, cities are just large multidisciplinary organizations. There are many of them in the world, and companies of similar sizes face the same challenges. So we do want to see that sustainability within cities particularly. And so that's why it's always good to think, cool, we're meeting the needs of the user now because we need to do that, but also are we ensuring that those needs can be fulfilled in the absence of us? And I think that's a very careful consideration to keep.
I want to latch on to one of your comments there. And this is a very interesting comment for me working with cities. I think when you go to them, you will often think that they don't know the solution. You might think that, you know what, you are going to bring about this innovative idea that they have not thought of. But interestingly, when you work with users and you work with champions, interestingly, they already know the answer and the solution to the problem, you know, because they have been facing it every day. They might say that, oh, I am facing a collection problem. I know what I need. And I think the journey that you want to step on with, and that fits in quite well to what Lerato has spoken about empathizing, is asking them, what do you think is the solution? And following this journey towards co-developing where they guide you towards that solution, and then you help them tie into that. And and those are such important points as you look at those strategic goals. Where does the city want to go into? For example, in this case, we're talking about a service delivery dashboard. Where does the city want to be in terms of service delivery in the next 5 years, next 10 years? And again, those can feed into this. My next question here with strategic goal is, you've talked about the first 3 points. We have been told to build this dashboard in 1 month, Matt. My question to you is, how can we build this dashboard in 1 month?
Well, I think that comes down to how much can you do in a month. And I think this is also where like the design thinking is really important. This is that continual interaction between the different implementing partners in this case. Like we're thinking of design as one aspect, data as another aspect, strategy and the city as another. I mean, we've got to come in and say, cool, what makes most impact now? What can we feasibly do with the resources available on this timeline? And I think that also really speaks to what is the purpose of this dashboard? Is this dashboard there to act as a proof of concept to show what's possible? Then you design that, cool. We just want to showcase it can be done with these few things to show you this is what it could look like. And then that's built for purpose to demonstrate what's possible. If it's got to answer a specific question, we dig in for that. Is it meant to automate? Then we've got to think about, cool, let's consider this 1 month then, this first step in the journey of ensuring that we're giving you what you want before we write all the code to keep that tap flowing by itself. And I think this is where that good communication, agile strategy is important, and expectation management, which is why it's so good. I like how OCL's model of where we have somebody like you, whose job it is to maintain that expectations. So they will ask, Lorata will walk them down a journey. I will look at it and say, I think we can do this in this time. And then we, through that trust-based discussion, are able to come to making sure that we're keeping them moving forward. We want to keep getting this for you, but take these in achievable, robustly achievable milestones.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to what Lorata has said as well, building iteratively, prototype, going on in iterations. I'm going to come to you, Lorata, right now, but I think one point here is just attaching to what Matt has also said, is that we want to deliver value as soon as possible, actually. We know that the problem for today is not a problem tomorrow. So we want to meet our partners where they are. But I think that there's often this state where it's almost like I said at the beginning, it might be that the partner thinks they give you the problem and you go find the solution and come back. But this is such a journey, and the momentum has to be driven from both sides, where both of you work towards making sure what is feasible and delivering as soon as possible to meet that need as soon as possible. Lorata, I want to ask you something here. You made a very good comment initially about there's nothing like perfect. So what does done look like? What does the finished product here look like? How do we define that?
The finished product is what meets the user's needs. The finished product is if the dashboard works to meet the user's needs, and also it could possibly, the finished product could possibly even be an MVP. I don't think it could be, there's a definition of what a finished product is, because it could be either an MVP or it could be like a fully fledged system where the users are able to run with it and implement other stuff on it themselves. So there isn't like a set definition of what finished looks like. It could be different things for different users and different needs.
And I always think about my phone for this as an example, right? So I use a particular phone. I use a high-end smartphone. But that phone, if I give it to my mom, she won't need that kind of phone. She would need something more simpler here. She would be like, I don't need all this fanciness. I don't take too many pictures. I don't chat too much on WhatsApp. I don't need iMessage. So she might need something less. But this is the interesting aspect, I think, when users coming to these sessions, and it ties into your point here, is that they kind of have seen a product somewhere else. They think that's what they need. But slowly as we go through this journey, we realize actually, and they also realize that they actually don't need that. What they need might be something more simpler, something that works for their solution. And that's where civic tech is quite different from technology, right? Civic tech is making sure that we develop whatever is needed rather than something bloated that not necessarily does not meet needs and goes beyond that. Matt, the last question for me here, and again, I think we've talked about this, but I want to specifically engage on this. How can we build capacity within the city to take this product? So we have developed this product. We have it on our systems. How do we now sustain it? Because we don't want to be gatekeepers. We don't want to keep this product on our systems and have the city, every time they want to use it, come to us. How can we go to them and tell them, okay, this is your product now. We want you to use it. We want you to know how to use it. We want you to be able to make changes to it, monitor it. Every time if there's maintenance, do that. How do we do that? What do we need to help them with this?
Sure, no, thanks. Yeah, it's a good question, Ali. I think what is important there is to ensure that we always make sure that we provide space for mentorship in the procedures. We request, and it also comes down to how one sets up these relationships, is to have dialogue with the partners in the city and saying we want this to be brought to you, and for it to be something you can sustain. Who in your team can this become part either of their upskilling, like planned training or upskilling? Can we restructure some of their KPIs to align with this so that it really matches? And I think that alignment of city KPIs is very important to make sure that doing this is seen as part of their job and their performance is graded accordingly, so that otherwise they're being asked to take a risk for something that's not going to reflect their performance. And I think we've got to be sensitive to that. But ultimately, I think it's got to say we want to work towards this, and we kind of need to have those discussions and unpack that could be something that we bring to the table eventually. Otherwise, we might have to adjust our strategy. But I think there it's about that clear communication between us and the partner, identifying people within their teams or assisting them to do that, so that there will be somebody that we can pass this on to, but also understanding that in terms of resourcing, we need to allocate time and effort to do that mentorship meaningfully. Now, the advantage is that if you can make one of these things, delivery of one of these assets, part of someone's KPI, it's a massive incentive for them to work on something that will benefit them in their career. It will have impact in the city. So we're not doing training, we're doing mentorship on co-created assets. I think that is a very important way to make sure that this gets adopted and stays skills-wise. Naturally, if there's struggles to get partners that will match that and actually do it, then that might need to go to some more strategic discussions with them to say, look, we can only, if we're not going to turn this into something that can go internally, we're going to leave you with some guides and some toolkits, and maybe we need to extricate ourselves for a time, perhaps, and advance the discussion maybe a little bit down the line.
Great. Thanks. I want to move to the next part, which is a very administrative part. One point I want to speak about, which Matt and Lars have both alluded to. One dashboard is only part of the story. I think often that what happens is, at least I've seen this, is that we create a dashboard linked to data. We have answered a particular set of questions. And then you have another department is also struggling with something similar. They have manual processes. They have different questions that they want to answer. And they want this dashboard to work for them. So sometimes you need to walk this journey where you want to define what is it that their actual problem is. Does the dashboard and the data define those set of questions? If not, how do we help them by developing a different set of dashboards and a different data pipeline that's linked to that? There's a comment on the chat. Which of these scenarios has worked for the products you have created? Open training to all staff in a department or a champion in each directorate that would be able to advocate for the use of the tool. Matt, you want to take a stab at it?
Sure. I would say that the most success we have is with champion-based endeavors. because it allows for that dialogue, that continual relationship and discussion. General training is usually good. It will be beneficial if there's momentum for that training to be part of the day-to-day, until those activities that people are being trained in is part of the day-to-day processes. It will potentially fall off with disuse. And so from my experience, our best success stories have come from the specific relationships where someone can operate within the city context to ensure that momentum keeps going. Because otherwise training is something that we do, and then there's a busy life to live. So if there needs to be that person who helps align it with city objectives, that it stays and it has persistence.
Lerato?
Well, I think for us, one of the success stories of having a champion was when we created data stories, and we had a champion within the city who pushed the whole narrative of creating the data story, and we capacitated her to create data stories on her own. So now we created the templates, and now she is just running with it. She's creating data stories every other day, and we are not gatekeepers in that process. So I think that's one of the success stories that we have.
Great example. Lerato, I'm very interested in this. We've talked about champions quite a bit. Who is a champion? How do you define the word champion?
So a champion is someone who shares passion, product goals, passion for the product goals, and who's willing to commit to the change they want to see in their organization. So we want city partners to be part of the process and to help us create solutions at every step of the design phase.
Yeah, that's well put. And I think that there are champions at different levels. There are those that will help you test the product. There are those that I think will work and give you good feedback on the product because they need it for their system. So who needs a service delivery dashboard to make decisions every day? There's a second level, I think, as well, a project lead. Someone like myself, I think, at the city level will help us with those administrative aspects. And I think that there is a third level as well, at the decision-making level. Who will make key decisions when we are blocked, when we face challenges, when we need them to help us with something? And this person can be, one person can fit all three, you know? One person can fit all these three, but it could be that they're separate people as well. And I think that is, I think it goes to an initial comment that it develops as time. We may get one person at the beginning, we might get a tester at the beginning, we might get a decision maker at another level, a few months down the lane, but it's such a process, and building trust just takes time. Lerato, there's a question here. Are there any interesting models where grassroots community members play an ongoing role for a token or earn? I'm not sure about this question actually. Oh. Lerato, do you want to take a stab? If not, Matt, you can go as well.
Is this, I'm not sure, is this about community building? Because I see the role of tokens.
So I can perhaps this can answer it. We have seen success in community-based monitoring efforts in partnership with some cities where people can work for either airtime, they work for, as you say, a token or actual payments. That usually comes in a third-party city partnership, where we've worked on it is where there's a need to say continual monitoring of infrastructure in say settlements around a South African city. Now, we didn't do the community-based monitoring ourselves. So it was a partner that did that, and they engage with the community members. They are able to equip them to go and measure, say, these taps are working, these showers are working, or when they're not working. And then in a partnership with the city, be able to start to engage, how does this information get to the city itself? So it becomes that partnership between civil society and the city. So in South Africa, VPUU, Violence Protection Through Prevention Through Urban Upgrading, is a fantastic organization that does work like this. They have relationships with communities. They enable them to do this community monitoring, and then through partnerships with the cities, that information can flow to the city. But there's an important part of ensuring that the city is capable of, is willing and able to take the information from the community and leverage it within their decision-making processes, thereby creating community-served information as a key stakeholder, a key data source to the city. And so I think this is areas that they're seeing some work in South African cities. And yeah, so I think there are definitely some good models for that, where this can, because it really puts that reporting, and that reporting at community level then needs to be matched by impact and effort from where that information goes. Otherwise, we're in that perpetual situation where communities are being researched to death and they're never seeing service delivery upgrades. So I think it's ensuring that there's definitely a good model to have communities monitor their own and collect their own data. It's then just making sure that there's a mechanism for that information to be leveraged and a will for that information to be leveraged once it's gathered. But I think it's definitely something that has shown success, and I think it's something that deserves a lot of attention and effort to enable us.
Thanks, Matt, for clarifying that question. I think it's also very useful in terms of how do you close the loop in terms of the data. I think the data comes in right at the beginning, has to come from the residents. And when they give feedback, how do we close the loop and give them feedback that, okay, you raised this issue about a pothole. You raised this issue about somewhere in the building that's dirty or rubbish. This is what has happened about it, so that they know that their needs are met and their trust with the government gets stronger and stronger. I think currently that's one of the challenges we face in South Africa, where we want to make sure that the residents and government trust building increases, and that I think data can play quite a good role there. I want to go to this last point about the methodology that we use. I spoke about this agile methodology at the beginning. Why is it that we use this agile methodology, Lerato? Why don't we just go sequentially, one step after the other?
I think because if you are gonna try to go one step after another, there are things that you miss. So for instance, if it's a linear process, you miss going back to the user and empathizing again, or you miss going back and redefining the problem again, because you are stuck to a linear way of working. Whereas an agile process, you can go back and define the goals again. You can go back and empathize with the users to find the right solution for the user's needs.
Yeah, and I think that it also speaks to that iterative development that they've told us to do 1 month, right? And Matt, I think you spoke about what do we need in 1 month. So I think with agile development, you are able to give pieces of the tool to the partner while you're developing the solution. Tell them, okay, we have developed this prototype, and okay, now we can go on and do something else in the next few months. Thanks, Lerato. That really clarifies it. And I think the next question here, I think for me, it's the last question really, is scope creep. There are different needs here. They always creep up. There are always these things that we need to, I think often I go into these sessions with cities, I'm presenting the product that we have developed. Someone else comes in and tells me, okay, this product doesn't work for me. I want you to do this for me. I think we had a recent situation like that. How do we, I think it's that separation that's always there, eh? And it goes back to the data at the beginning. It doesn't matter that what kind of data do we have feeding into that dashboard currently. and can it meet those needs at the end?
Sorry, Andy, could you repeat the question? I got distracted by a comment in the chat where there's some good discussion. So do you mind repeating
as long
that?
as you are discussing, as long as you're
Yeah.
engaging, is there a comment I've missed that we should discuss?
No, it's fine. I mean, do you mind just repeating that question?
Cool, no problem. So I was saying that I have situations where I'm presenting the product and there's another department that comes in and goes like, hey, actually, I would like this dashboard to also do this. And there is a scope creep potentially there. There is a potential that we may not have met the need. How do we define that with the data? How do we define that? And Lerato, I also want you to come in later as well. How do we define that with the user itself as well? Because we have started with a set of users, and now I'm showing this dashboard, and there's a different set of users that are giving me feedback that this dashboard does not work for them. How do we tie that in? Matt, can you take a first step and then I'll come to you?
Yeah, sure. No, it's good. It will happen. It's always a good thing that it's a challenge to deal with, but it's a good thing to see because it shows that there's engagement and excitement. I think the second that you're having two different primary users on a page is already the sign that something new might need to be built, but Lerato can confirm that for me. I think you want to, I think there's a careful process of needing to understand how much. I think first of all, making sure that you are keeping the primary user the same. If that needs to shift, or if data sources are needing to shift or new things are needing to feed in, it does start to suggest that maybe this needs to be viewed as another adjacent piece of work. That doesn't mean that it shouldn't be done, but it needs its own journey, its own unpacking of need, its own questions. And if it's a different department, then there's going to be different, it should have its own journey. I think if in terms of usability, they say it's not working for us because I can't see these colors, or the font is really difficult, or this jargon speaks only to this department, but it could be made more accessible. That accessibility piece can be discussed for multiple users, ensuring that it's always provided to the broadest user base possible. But if it's requiring that fundamental shift of underlying question, underlying data set, and core user, then it should have its own journey, I would say.
So Lerato, I'm going to change my question to you a bit. What I'm going to ask you is, based on what Matt has said, one dashboard, how many users can one dashboard satisfy? So we have created one dashboard. Can it meet the needs of 10 users, 20 users? What's the limit here?
Well, going back to the initial empathize phase and user engagement, we are not creating like a one size like fits all kind of solution. So if it's 10 users, it could possibly mean different other solutions for them and where they fit into the journey. So one solution could work for a specific kind of user, and a different kind of solution could work for someone else. And this doesn't mean creating 10 dashboards. It means creating different solutions for the different types of users. It could be anything else. It could be creating maybe data stories. It could be a solution of creating something else that fits that specific user's needs. Because now if you're trying to fit every user into one box, you are not going to meet everyone's needs. And there's always going to be a challenge of, we don't have this, or this doesn't fit into how we work. So I think it also speaks to like what Matt said about introducing also different departments within the system. So if, let's say, this dashboard that we created, as someone else from a different department needs to access certain information or certain data sets, what's the journey of that person actually reaching what they need? And is that dashboard the right solution for them, or do we need to create something else that fits their needs?
Amazing, amazing, amazing. Just a round of applause to both of you. Well done. I've interrogated you a lot today.
Back at you.
So everyone, we started with this use case. We had 3 points. They've given us data. They wanted a dashboard. They wanted it as soon as possible. They wanted it in 1 month. We have covered all of these. Very exciting. I think Lerato and Matt have been champions, honestly, here, really discussing quite a few things. Lerato and Matt, first of all, let me go to the audience. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask us right now. We want to spend the last few minutes answering your questions before we close the session today. I think it has been terrific. Matt and Lerato, I want to ask you in 1 minute, do you have any parting thoughts? Just summarizing in 1 minute what you've talked about. I'll start with Lerato. 1 minute, any parting thoughts from your space?
Alrighty. So I think just beginning with code designing with the user to create the best solution to fit their needs. So constantly keeping that in mind, and that I think this goes back to your initial question, is that are user engagements necessary? I'm gonna say that again, that they are necessary to identify who the users are and what role they play in the department. And my last point is that we also need to understand the department's current system in order to identify gaps and create a user journey for them of what's happening right now and like the ideal situation that they would like to be in. Those are my 3 points.
Lovely, thanks very much. Matt?
Sure. I'd say first thing, always start with the question and only use the information that's sufficient, that's necessary and sufficient to answer that question. Always try to be a minimalist where possible, Occam's razor wherever possible. The second one would be that cities are people are complex, people have their own journeys, and it's important to carefully and sensitively walk that road while also making sure that you give space to yourself to protect yourself walking into a potentially fraught space. Be confident, back yourself, take it step by step, do the research, build the relationship. And then as a last point, built with is better than built for, and built by is better than built with. So if you can move as fast as possible, move city people up that trajectory, because in the end, the real impact is going to come when they can do it themselves at scale. And that will hopefully really, really help bring benefits to the communities that these cities work for and genuinely care about most of the time, I believe. So, yeah.
Thanks very much, Pat. My parting thoughts are, one is the dashboard is just one solution, I think. That a dashboard needs to fit into the city's goals. Where does the city want to be in the next 10, 20 years? How does this solution fit into that? And when you tie that into that strategic goal, you make a much more lasting impact than just meeting one need right now. And my second point, I think, is that I'm very interested in this, how do we build capacity within the city to make sure that they take on this tool? We don't want to manage this tool. We want them to manage it. We want them to be able to make better decisions. We want them to be able to build these products. And we are there just to play the support role. We are just there to help them. We are the assister and they are the goal scorer, really, if you're looking at football. So those are my parting thoughts. We have a comment on the chat. Thank you for the session, very informative. I tried the department level training and it did not work, and I will implement the champion model to encourage use of a dashboard I created. Oh, wonderful. Thanks very much. Been a terrific discussion. Thanks so much. Lovely. As we can see, we are getting some good comments. Are there any parting thoughts, any parting comments, perhaps, colleagues? I think you can also unmute yourself, perhaps. I'm not sure. Just going to see if there are any hands that are there. You can raise your hands and you can also ask us any questions if you have any. We haven't covered anything. We would love to engage on this. Cool. I don't see anything coming through yet. Maybe I'll give it one more minute before we close out.
Also, feel free to reach out to Open Cities Lab through our website, through LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I think we're on all of those. I'm not very good at social media, so I'm not entirely sure. But I think, yeah, please feel free to reach out through any of our online channels, opencitieslab.org. Yeah, always keen to hear from people.
I've put my email on the chat. Yes, lovely. Thanks very much for reminding me that, Matthew. Garth, you have your hand raised. Go for it.
Yes, thanks for an amazing presentation and very robust discussion. My question is around, could you just give me one or two examples of the type of initiative that you've deployed at the city, what was needed and what was developed is the first question. And the second question is, how do you, sorry, let's just answer the first question. Just an example of a solution for and which city it was and how things have changed as a result of the deployment.
So I can give an example earlier if you'd like, unless you've got one that you'd like to use.
No, please go ahead.
I was going to say we worked, it's an example that Laurent has actually mentioned earlier, but in specifics, it's the EDGE in eThekwini, which is the kind of economic unit and research there. We had a wonderful relationship with, and still do, with a champion there, Zechang, who has been, where we started the journey of starting with the data portal, moved to working with her and the team to do data sharing across that, then starting to put up data stories, where they would kind of co-create, but we would still put that up. And then there was an introduction of Webflow solution to the system, whereby they get given control of the CMS and can go ahead and populate the systems that put up information themselves, supported by some of our designs and the system infrastructure and architecture, but they're running with it, they're publishing, it's their information, their hard work, their success. And I think that's been really, really cool to see. And Zechang really took on the risk to work with us and push for this, which has been fantastic and phenomenal. And she's done really wonderful work there. So I think that is quite a good example. If you go to edge.durban, you will be able to see the shared, the collaborative system that's happened there.
Thanks, Matt. Your next question, Garth.
Thanks for that response, Matt. And my second question was just in terms of if there are missing data sets that you identify, how do you kind of navigate that? Do you speak to your partner in terms of trying to capture these data sets? Do you strategize in terms of how you could go about acquiring it or sourcing it together? Yeah, just mainly around data gaps. How do you navigate that with your partner?
Sure. No, it's a great question. That I think in general, what we would seek to do is we can often do investigative work to propose potential solutions. It's ultimately then should be up to the cities to make the decision. Either it can be through improving or introducing new forms of collection within the city. So we have worked before in eThekwini with helping one of the departments develop a form that they could use to gather information that they needed. And then they could run with it. Now they're collecting that information, and it's actually using the Kobo toolkit. And then they ported the stuff to, I think it was to Survey 123, because the two systems have intercompatible forms. They could now go and gather information, so thereby creating their own new in-source. But in some cases, it might be, look, the city needs to, if they need to outsource it, then you sort of start thinking about, well, can you provide guidance for them to move it to procurement, because it comes down to how that information needs to be procured. In some cases, yeah, it all comes down with the relationship of at the point, and particularly the type of data. But often it's about helping introduce new internal data gathering or reporting methods, or to help talk to different departments and understand what information is actually available in the city that just hasn't connected between the two departments yet.
Noted. Understood. Thank you.
Thanks, Garth. Thanks very much for those questions. I think that last point, Matt, is really useful. I think that sometimes we talked about building trust and building relationships takes time. And cities are huge. They're huge spaces that sometimes what you are doing basically is making one department talk to another department. That's all you're doing. And that's completely fine as well, because you don't want to build a system just for the sake of building a system. It helps nobody really. Garth, I think you have one more question before
Could I squeeze
close
one
out.
more in?
Go for it.
Sorry,
Yes,
sorry.
of course.
I just wanted to ask regarding the POPI and personal data. How do you guys navigate that? Do you anonymize the data? Or can you just give an example of how you've navigated the personal information?
I'm a huge stickler. Ali will tell you that I'm a huge stickler for personal information, but also because I'm our data officer.
For good reason, of course.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a big fan of Papaya. I think it's a good thing. I think we always want to be careful because cities do have the right to use that information. They do have a mandate. They should be allowed. Like, there's nothing wrong with using personal information. I think what we do when we work with cities is we try to position ourselves where there's almost never a need for us to work with sensitive information, be it both personal information sensitive or business sensitive information. So we do try to anonymize as much as possible, or we work within careful data agreements, or we work within shared space that has got good protections around it. So we're very, very upfront about the data requirements, methods to work with it. And if we don't need it, we don't use it because there's no, for example, if we're building a dashboard, we don't need a list of the city people's emails. We can build a dashboard and say to them, cool, if you needed to know your teammate username on this, sure, you could add it here, but that's going to be the kind of thing that you add when you build it inside the city. And so, yeah, we try to stay very careful and aware on that, but anonymization is a very useful way of getting by.
Perfect. Thank you. I promise I'm done now. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Clark. Thanks very much for your questions. I think the one point I'll add to what Matt was also saying is, what data do you need? Do you need personal data to actually make that decision? And often the answer, I think, is no, which is quite important, and we often don't realize that. Okay, colleagues, like I said at the beginning of this is not the end. I know we have just touched the surface. We had very little time. We could go on days talking about this. So we want to continue this conversation. If you would like to chat more about this, feel free to email me and I will share it with Larato or Matt. Visit our website as well, check out our work. We are very excited to continue in this chat and we hope that this session was useful to you. Thanks again, Matt. Thanks again, Larato. Thanks again to the RISE team who helped us with all the admin today. Garth, Sinatemba, everyone, you guys were wonderful. Thanks very much. I hope you guys have a lovely evening and a great rest of the week. Bye, everyone.
Cheers all. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.